All right, I think we're back. Welcome back, guys. We're going to finish what we started with our controller mapping in the first video, our controller mapping refactor. I think I had gotten to the part where I about finished up our processors, at least the initial ones, and I wanted to go ahead and start integrating this into our interaction mappings, and then going through and making sure that the rest of our interaction mappings were set up correctly. So last time we created these input processors and we applied them here. We added two methods here in our interaction mapping classes. So we can get the processors for this mapping by the type of input processor. And then we also got a more generic type here, so we can get all the input processors for a specific value type like float, boolean, vector2, vector3, those kinds of things. So this will be really helpful for what we're going to do next. So the next thing we want to do is apply these input processors to the data that we're actually transforming. Now before, we kind of talked a little bit about how before there's a reason why we have all of these different specific value types coming back out of this, but I'm kind of rethinking this a little bit, and I'm wondering if there was any benefit to actually making this struct a generic type as well, so that we can pass in the type that we'll be using for it. I'm not sure if I'll get that far or not. I'm really interested in keeping it the way that it is for the most part, and just applying these filters. One thing I wanted to do as well was cache these input processors, so we don't have to iterate through this this list every time and get the generic type arguments. This could be pretty slow, so I want to make sure that we have a list of defined processors for each of our types here that we're going to be putting into this. So I think I might do that next. Let's see here. So for our Boolean data, we want to get all of the input processors for our type. Let's see here. So we're going to say private, and it'll be a list, and it'll be input processors of type Boolean. So this is going to be all of our input processors that only take the Boolean generic type constraint. So what we'll do is we'll initialize this in the constructor after we've set our input processors here. What we'll do is we'll go ahead and loop through all of those, and we'll set each of our properties. I think I'll actually do this last here at the end. We're going to say input processors, and we're going to actually we're going to call the get input processors for type, and we'll say Boolean here. Let's see, and this should return a read-only list. I think what we want to do, I think this should be fine. I just don't want to create a copy of this list. I realize that maybe this might not be as beneficial. I think it'll be fine. I'm just going to change the type for this Boolean input processor to be the read-only list. We'll probably only be creating this the very first time we create the this interaction mapping anyway, so I'm not too worried as long as this is cached and we're able to utilize that. I don't know why I didn't copy the right keyword here. There we go. All right, so that should be what we want there. See, is it still missing something? This object cannot be used before all of its fields are assigned. So let's see, let's just make sure. Looks like it's calling this. So it's calling the base constructor, and then we are initializing all of the types. Okay. So let's go ahead and do the same thing for the rest of our data structures. I believe we're also missing one here. I'll also do the same thing. At the end here. and I believe we also need to call into the initializing the struct field data before we can actually do that. Okay, so let's see. So we got our Boolean input processors, and what do we want to do with this? We want to say for each of our Boolean input processors, we're going to process all of our data. And we're going to say, let's see here, what do we want to actually do the work on? I think we want to do the work on the value. Although I kind of want to, I don't really want to mess with the value on its way in though. But that seems to work. Okay. So the value comes in, we check it, we check to see if the control is activated, and then we set that Boolean data. I think we're going to probably follow the rest of this pattern for the rest of it. And we don't want to do that because that will probably allocate. Let's see here. Well, that messed it up, didn't it? All right, cool. So we may want to do the same thing here as well. Give me 1 sec. I'm going to go ahead and share this stream with whomever wants to see real quick. To the usual channels. All right. So we're continuing the stream from earlier today, and we're finishing up our controller mapping refactor. Okie dokie. So let's go back here. All right. So sorry about the wait, guys. And so let's see here. So what we did was we implemented our first input processor list. This is essentially going to be the cache list for us, which is going to work out really well. One thing too was we can go through here and we can check to see if any of our types exist. I think I might actually leave this as is. So we can get a fresh list if we need, but typically I'm going to try and limit the amount of times we use this outside of this class. All right, so we got our Boolean data set up and our input processor list for that. The next one we'll do is our float data, and I think I might just go ahead and just copy and paste all these and change the types as we need them. All right, and then one last type, which is our pose. All right, and then we'll go ahead and make sure that all of these are initialized in our constructor. Let's let's see here. It should be giving us errors about that. Surprised it's not actually. So let's see here. Initialize in the constructor. It looks like it tried to add it everywhere. So let's not do that. I'll just go ahead and copy and paste these as well. All right, and we just need one more for our mixed reality pose. Oh, I made it shorter. Okay, so those are all of those. Let's also make sure to do this here in the copy as well. Okay, so that should be fine. Now, let's see here. So we did this Boolean one. We'll also do the same thing. We'll essentially just copy what we have in the bool here. We'll take this one and we'll paste it here. And we'll reference the new value here. And just for the sake of consistency, we'll go ahead and do the same thing where we set a local variable here to do that. Let's see here. Ref cannot doesn't match the parameter type, so we need to go ahead and copy using the wrong list here. So okay, great. So we got this one. Let's go ahead and work on the next ones. Now, if we'd been using a generic class, this would be a lot easier because we'd only have to do it the one time, but because we're wanting to save on performance, we just hard-coded all of the specific types of data that these mappings can essentially process in there already. All right, so let's see here. We're gonna reference these new values. Okay, just a few more here. This is the part where I feel like sometimes this could be tedious, but I think it's worth it in the end if we're able to get a little bit more performance out of this to make sure that we are getting as much out as we can. This is going to be definitely a speed critical place where we're processing input. It's definitely something where, you know, players of any game or even people not even playing games but interacting with any kind of computer system, they expect a certain type of response from the system at any time, and that's always important. All right, let's see here. Pose input processors. Here we go. All right. Okay, so seems to be set up correctly. Let's go ahead and go to the areas in the controllers where we had, oh, this is interesting. We'll come back to actually implementing the controllers themselves, because I know we need to update their mappings, their default interaction mappings. I'm not too worried about that. I am more interested in areas like this one where we have the generic joystick controller wants to know whether or not we're inverting the x-axis. And I thought that was pretty interesting because that's kind of important to know. That's something that we may need to know for doing all sorts of different things. So one of the things we could do, I suppose, interaction mapping, we can get our processors by type, and we could do this is a single axis or dual axis. So we can get our invert single axis processor. And then we'll want to know if our processor x-axis, we want to get the first one, huh? I wonder if we should just get the first one that comes out of that type. It would be kind of interesting to have multiple of a type in here. So I think I might actually go ahead and as soon as we find that first one, I think we should just return that one in this. I think that makes sense here. We're only expecting one type to come back out. So it's either return null or return the one that we find. Now I did have my test, I will have to update my test that I'm using this essentially to make sure that we're only returning one back out. But I think it makes sense to only want one type of processor inside of that, at least a concrete type anyway. Okay, so let's see, input processors. Let's go back to generic joystick controller. We're able to get our processor back out, and we could say processor invert x-axis. Is that correct? Invert single axis. Oh, invert. All right, so we just want to know if it is inverted or not. Okay, so there we go. One thing too that's kind of interesting here, again, I don't know if I want to have to iterate and loop over all of these things in here, but I suppose we could cache this value as well. I'm still trying to figure out how I kind of want to do that. I'm not sure what we could do to possibly do that. All right, so this is the one where we finish this. I'll check out the performance impact on this later, but I am kind of curious if I should need to have to get this out every time. All right, let's see. So we have another section here. This looks like is also a single axis one. So we'll get the processor here as well for the mapping. Just copy this. And again, we just want to see if that single axis is inverted. All right, so this is more where our controller definitions are messed up. We'll come back to this. Not too worried about that just yet. So for this one, we know that it's going to be 1. We get 1 back. So I'm not too worried about this. I'm just going to update the test to just check to make sure that the axis is inverted. Oh, this is expecting a dual axis, so okay, so I'm not worried about that. Let's see here. So let's continue to go through. Looks like now we just have to update our actual controller mapping. So I'll take a look at that here, and that'll be the next thing we do. So now we've got the interaction mappings set up. We got all of our processors set up, so we should be processing the data correctly now. So that should also be working. So I'm going to go ahead and close a couple of these. So now we need to actually fix how we're defining each of the interaction mappings. So let's see, I changed the constructors around a little bit in the last video. So we are now looking at, let's see here, description, axis type, input type, the action, the key code, and then so this is expecting 2 strings at the end to define the axis X and axis Y. Okay, so I'm thinking here what we can do is we'll do a new list of input processors. and we'll actually initialize this list with a new, and it'll be, actually we can't do new because it's a scriptable object, so scriptable object create instance, and it'll be our dual axis. I believe this one will be our dual axis processor. There we go. All right. So just to help make this a little bit more readable, I think I'm going to go ahead and break some of these down onto other lines here. There we go. All right. And let's see here. What we're going to do with this, I don't know if I can actually modify this in place, which is kind of frustrating, actually, because I want to be able to set the flags on this in this array that we're defining as an input action. So this could be somewhat frustrating. Let's see what I can do about this. So I can actually get that, and I can do it there, I suppose. I do want to take a look at what this value was before. So let's see here. If I go back to our controller, we take a look at the changes. So this was false and then true. So I'm guessing the x-axis was not inverted and the y-axis was. Okay. Again, this is going to get upset because it's probably expecting a new item. Okay, so this will not work like I was hoping it would, which is kind of saddening because I was really expecting to be able to use a scriptable object as part of this list generation. Let's see here. All right, so this won't work like I was hoping it would. What is another way that I can do this? Well, I suppose where we are calling this, we can change this to a statement body, and before we try to initialize this array, we can go ahead and create the processors we need. I think that's what I'm going to go ahead and end up doing. Dual axis processor, and we'll say this one. So one of the other reasons why I wanted to make the processor scriptable objects is so that we could reuse them as much as possible. Which is really, I thought, was one of the advantages of them, but it seems like in this case this might not be as helpful as I thought it would be, especially when we're trying to define these input actions in code. So I guess we'll see what happens. I'm going to also go ahead and just wrap this back up on the line. Not worry too much about that guy. Okay, so I'm going to create a new list of input processors, and that'll be our new dual input access processor. And what I'm going to do as well, I'm going to fix these up. For some reason they got chopped off. Okay, so it looks like we only needed it for that one there, so that is, I think that's workable. One thing we do need to do when we initialize this array in the inspector for the defaults, when someone has like no mappings and they want to create new mappings, we also want to make sure we write the scriptable object to an asset file and save that to disk for them as well. But we don't want to bundle them all up together because we want to utilize a lot of these as well. Let's see here. So this one also is kind of the same. So I'm going to go back up. I'm just going to copy this guy as well. We're going to do the same thing where we are going to change this to a statement body. And we're going to add that line here. Clean up our lines. Here we're going to do the new list. Of input processors. And then we'll just initialize that list with our tool access processor there. All right, so let's see, we got 2 more classes I think that are broken for the same reason. So we'll have to go ahead and update those as well. All right, what do we got here? This is the Windows Mixed Reality controllers. So okay, so we'll do the same thing. Change to a statement body, and we'll add our invert dual axis mapping. Actually, I need to go back. I don't think that I properly initialized the other controller correctly. Oh, we did have more than I thought. Let's see here. What class was that? The generic OpenVR controller. There's quite a lot of changes here. All right. Generic joystick controller, I think, is the one that we... Oh, no. Okay, so this is where we are applying or getting the processor out and just checking to see if the value is inverted. I don't know if this... Yeah. Okay. All right, so we're not actually initializing that scriptable object like we should be in these. So let me go back and do that. I thought I did add it, but I think I forgot to actually add the processing types here. So generic OpenVR controller. All right, so we needed to flip the y-axis. Here we go. And then probably the same for this one. I'm just going to double check for the right hand, but it's probably similar. Yeah, so X and then Y. So that one looks correct. I'm going to go ahead and stage that one so I know that I've already processed it. And then for this one, it looks like the same thing where we just flip it on the y-axis. So we'll be doing this a few times in different classes here. All right. Now, the reason why we do this is that we have the ability to define all of the actions that people can do in code, because some people, programmers want to be able to code this stuff out. But the other flip side of this is we also want designers to be able to do the same things that the programmers are doing. So we try our best to make sure you can do anything you could do in code, you can do in the editor and vice versa. All right, and then we'll initialize that with our dual axis processor. All right, so one more down here at the bottom. And I'll just copy what we got up here to make it a little bit easier. All right, just a little bit of formatting. Oops, wrong line. I knew I was going to do that on one of them at least. All right, so the Windows Mixed Reality controller is done. All right, so I'm just going to copy this guy real quick and we'll move on to the next one. So it looks like the mouse, we've actually flipped both the X and the Y axis on this one. So let's see here. It's interesting. This looks a little bit different than what we have here. All right. Let's see here. We'll go ahead and change this back to a statement body, and we'll paste this, and we'll go ahead and make sure we get both the X and the Y axis here. Oh. I guess it's going to be upset until I fix the references. Looks like my tooltip is freaking out on me. All right. And again, we're just going to fix the formatting here so it looks a little bit prettier, a little bit easier to read. All right, so each one of these mappings is what's going to show up in that list for our controller. And this will be editable. And then we'll also have a pretty window for them as well once we're done. All right, I think we got one more. Here we go. Same thing here, we're just gonna change this to use the statement body so that we're able to create our variable. Let's see. I'll just fix the formatting on this real quick. Oops. And just for the sake of ease here, let's go ahead and actually copy this list one too. All right, so this one is false, true. So we will not be flipping the x-axis on this one, just to make sure. All right, and there we go. So we got each one of those ready to go. So this, I think, should work how we want it to. So let's see. Let's just take a look at all the changes we've made so far. So we did change our test. We ended up making sure that we're only getting one back out. And then we updated all of our controllers that had dual axis mappings that were flipped or single axis mappings that were flipped, and we made sure to get those situated as well. All right, so let's go ahead and add those. So we updated the default controller interactions to include our input processors. All right, and then we also updated our tests. Let's see, just one more time. We'll go back over through this. Yep. Oh, we updated our test, but we also actually implemented the processing. So input processors now actually do the processing on the value. All right, so go ahead and push that up. Okay, so I'm just really quickly going to recap everything we've done, and I want to just take a look at the inspector and to make sure we are creating the input processors correctly when we clone our initial default interaction mappings. Okay, so first off, it looks like it's a little bit upset. It's not compiling, so we'll just give it a second here while it does that for us. Will it compile? Looks like we got all the error messages out. Oh, here we go. It just took a moment. Okay, so I'm going to go to our input here, and it looks like that the references to our, oh no, they were there. I think maybe we just deleted them before. Yeah, we'd only created the ones. So let's go ahead and just delete these. All right. We're going to go back up one level, and we're going to go ahead and let's try it on the mouse. Okay, so it looks like for our spatial mouse position, I don't know if we actually had the input processor for that one. I want to say we only had it for, let's see here, let's go back to the mouse controller. So I believe we had it for the scroll direction position. Is that correct? Am I reading that correctly? Yeah, so for the scroll position. So let's take a look at scroll position. So that pointer profile did not show up. But it also says it looks like we're getting a type mismatch. So this could be for a couple reasons. It may be that the inspector doesn't know exactly what it's drawing, so it's not sure how to draw that. But we could also use our inspector, our custom inspector for this as well. So I may end up going along that route and just making sure that will work. Well, it does look like it actually set one, so that's nice. So maybe it did get set. Let's see here. So input processors, we got 0 here. If I do 1, what does this give us? Okay. And I'm just going to set this back to 0. You know, it could be that because we didn't actually create a file, that this may not be showing up correctly. But if we go to debug, what does this show us? Input processors. Again, we're getting just a type mismatch. I bet it's because we're not actually creating the file asset to use. So we'll take a look at that. Let's see. We'll go back up to the data provider. That's where we're doing all of our instantiating. In the inspector for this base mixed reality controller profile, we're actually creating all the references for our controller as we clone everything out, essentially. And this is only the first time. If you don't have these profiles created, this will go and create those profiles for you, essentially. Okay, so let's see. Interaction mapping. Okay, so one last thing we want to do here. Let's see. Interaction mapping asset, interaction mapping, and then for our processors, we need to take a look at that. So we can get all the input processors by type. I kind of want to just get all of the input processors by themselves. I may actually make the getter public or internal. I'm not really sure. Much more of a defensive programmer, so I try not to expose fields and values inside of classes very often unless they absolutely need to see or need to have them. So take a look at that. So navigate back to our interaction mapping class because I will need that. All right. I believe we actually have already in our serialized properties, we should already have the list of input processors here. All right, so let's just go ahead and expose a read-only list of these guys. and we'll just reference the list we already got. All right, so we'll come back to our inspector. So we'll get all of our input processors. And what we want to do with this is we want to iterate over this collection and then let's see here, and then essentially create that asset that we don't have. So let's see here. I believe we actually may want to make this an internal setter. Yeah, I think I might make this internal only because we do want to be able to modify this list. But we don't want just anyone to be able to modify the list. Really, we just want to modify this list when we create the asset itself. But also, we don't want to create multiple instances of these processors. We want to be able to apply these in different places as well. So that's kind of also an interesting little caveat here. I gotta think about this a little bit. So we already created the instance. We just need to create the asset that we will be putting to that, and then set the object reference value for the field that we want it to be. Yeah, I'm not really sure how to do this. I gotta think about this for a minute. I think for now what I'm going to do is see if I can actually reference creating an instance of one of these dual axis scriptable objects and then setting that reference inside of the inspector. That'd probably be good to do. In order to do that, for the scriptable objects, you can do a create asset menu. That should just have it show up in the project window. When you go under create here, we should have it show up here somewhere. All right, I'm going to just drill into this mouse controller profile once everything recompiles. All right, and we were in the scroll position delta. That's the one that we were looking for. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove that guy. In here, I'll go ahead and create my dual axis invert processor here. And we're going to say invert y axis. Let's change this back. Oh, this is still normal. Interesting. I'm wondering why the inspector is kind of being weird here. I think that'll be okay. So let's kind of get back to where we're at. We're in the mouse controller profile here. And then we were trying to update our mouse scroll position profile. And let's reference this here. Yeah. So that type mismatch, I have a feeling it's because the scriptable object doesn't have an asset file that it's referencing, the GUID essentially, for the input processors. So we will need to figure out how to do that there. I do want to update this inspector as well to maybe have a drop down of available processors. But really this pop-up window, once you do this, you should be able to essentially find a list of existing assets that you can put in here. But I'm also wondering if we want to create a new instance of one of these profiles to use right away if we want it as well. I think that is also somewhat interesting. Here we go. I don't know why the inspector was being weird there for a minute. All right, so I could create a custom drawer for this that will make this a little bit nicer. I'm not too worried about that though. Definitely more interested in how can I make this a little bit easier to deal with in the inspector. All right, so I'm almost half tempted to actually make this a profile or derived from a profile so that I can get our nice little add button here. Essentially what that does is if there's not anything in the slot, it's easy to add one. So that's kind of nice. So like even though we don't have a pointer profile, if I click this, it will go ahead and add one for us, which is nice, but do want to make sure that we are also giving people the opportunity to reuse these assets, because there's a lot of like files that we're creating with this new approach, but we want to make sure we're reusing as much as we can, and that's really up to the developer, I think. Let's see here. So I'm going to go ahead and edit this script. I'm going to go down to this here, and I'm going to say base mixed reality profile. What this will do is give us a couple of advantages here for rendering profiles in the inspector. So we'll take a look at how this will work here. Give it a second for it to update. All right, while that's updating, I'm going to check my chat log here. Okay, so let's take a look at this guy. All right, so now if we wanted to, we can actually create a new one. Although this is now saying, oh, none list. So I believe there's a way to be able to specify the type that we want in here. So this may not actually work like I thought it would. So if I do it now, it'll definitely get mad because we're like, oh, this is not a generic type. So interesting. So we won't be able to use that like I thought we would. So I'm going to go ahead and just change this back to being a scriptable object. All right. It's a good idea at the time, but I think for the most part, we want to make these more like a generic type. They're not really like a profile. Although they are scriptable objects, even profiles are scriptable objects in our framework. So really they just hold some data, but we don't need them to be mixed reality specific profiles. I don't know if that makes sense. Let's see here. Okay, so I'm going to clear this out. So we could still add our processor if we wanted. See if figure out a way to create this asset and then set it. And then we want to create this asset. Okay. So let's go back to the inspector. All right, here we are. So this is where we would want to do it. So we have an interaction mapping that we've set, but we need to still create the asset that we need. And then the asset goes into the object reference value. So we may still need to get a scriptable object for this interaction mapping. All right, and we're just going to say this guy, new scriptable object. I'm sorry, not scriptable object. Serialized object. I keep doing this. In the last video, I did the same thing, probably like a few times. Let's see, but for the serialized object, it needs a unity object. So we actually need to do the interaction mapping asset itself. So let's see. Serialized, not scriptable. All right, so, and again, we're gonna have to do the same thing that we've done in previous parts here. We have to find our property relative to the thing. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy one of these so I don't have to type as much. Let's see. And we're going to call this our, let's see, what exactly were we looking for? Interaction mapping. Okay. Interaction mapping property. All right, so now that we've got our interaction mapping property, we can get the object reference value and then set that, and then we want to serialize it afterwards. So the next thing we need to do is well, we already have our instance created. We actually just need to create the asset. So we can take the interaction mapping object itself. So we're going to say, ooh, this is interesting. So we need to rename this to be profile asset, because this is actually the profile, but then this next one is actually the serialized object, so it's actually the struct. So if we actually take a look at this, essentially we've nested this interaction mapping into a scriptable object so that we could set it and write it to a file on disk, essentially. So we'll just kind of update that a little bit. So it'll be our interaction mapping. It will say create asset. I believe we can do that right off here. Oh, I changed this. I'm going to create this asset. Oh, hold on. This is not. We need to. Oh, yeah. We need to loop over all of our interaction mappings. I believe this should be plural, right? It's not. All right, we'll make that plural. And we'll also, just for the sake of ease, in case we already have something that's already serialized somewhere, formally serialized attribute saves people a lot of time. And we'll update this and we'll figure out all the places it breaks. All right, just the one place, so that's not bad. All right. So essentially, interaction mappings, we need to S's in a lot of different places. Let's see here. All right. That is our array of profiles. So this is probably in this up one. So this is this array. Okay. So I think we're going to want to do the same thing where we clear the array for our interaction mappings. Maybe. No. No, I don't think we need to do that. Let's see here. Do need to iterate over this though. It's getting kind of confusing because our nested methods here are got a lot of similar names on these, but I think it's important to definitely keep track of that so we don't get too confused. Okay, so we're going to get element at index k, and that'll be our specific mapping, right? No. Interaction mappings property. Yes, so we do have a collection of these guys. Yep. No. It is only one. I don't know why I'm iterating over this. Adding these S's was a bad idea. Reverting all this. I'm getting confused with all the names being so similar. So we find the interaction mapping property. So that is actually the struct. And then next we want to do essentially the same thing to find the nested property inside, which is our input processors. Find property relative, and it will be input processors. There we go. All right, that makes more sense. Now this will be the list that we iterate over. Let's see here. So for each of our input processors, this is an array. Let's see. We'll get our processor property, and that will be the input processors property. No. Yes. Get element at index k. Now that is what we're looking for. And then the processor's property will equal our new asset. It'll be our object reference value. Will equal the new asset that we're going to create. So let's see here. We'll go ahead and create it pretty much in the same place, that like right next to the other asset that we had. All right, and this is going to be this interaction mapping here that we'll create that asset with. Or maybe not. Now we want to interaction mapping input processors. Okay, there we go. So that is the instance that we want to create an asset of. That makes sense. Okay. This is a little bit confusing. I'm still trying to understand it myself. This isn't a profile, so I'm going to just remove that. And then this is supposed to be the name. So we will give it the name of... I don't know if we'll give it a name, actually. If I don't give this a name, what does it name it? Let's see. File name, the file name is blank, then it just gets the type and sets the name. So I think that's fine. Okay. So it'll just be dual axis input processor, 1, 2, 3, whatever. As long as there's not duplicates in the same spot. Yeah, I think that should work for what we want. Okay, so once we've iterated over this, we do need to apply the modified properties. Then we'll be good. And then we have this one. This one's a little bit different. This is the interactions property down below. Doesn't look like we actually have to apply the serialized value there. I don't know if we actually need to do this, so I'll go ahead and remove that line. Let's see if that works. Go ahead and delete everything that's here. I'm just going to check on my stream, make sure that it's still healthy real quick. Cool. Let's see. I'm not worried about that right now at the moment. Okay, so let's take a look. All right, let's try a different one besides mouse this time. Let's try the Windows Mixed Reality controllers. All right, so we got a null reference not set on an object. So let's take a look at that. And that is here. For some reason, our interaction mapping is coming back wrong. So that's probably right because we're not grabbing it from the correct place here. Here we go. All right, so let's try that again. Let's go back and delete all this stuff. We had referenced the wrong property to find relative. That's kind of the reason why I don't like those serialized assets so much. Serialized objects are just kind of annoying to work with. It seems like you're having to look everything up by string. Not ideal. Let's try the joystick controller this time. A little bit loud. I'm going to turn that down. Okay. All right. So can't add object to asset file because the mono behavior invert dual access processor is already an asset. Okay. I think that makes sense. So it sounds like it tried to create it twice, and that's probably because we were attempting to create these, and we already have one. And I think for the next one, it probably got upset about that. Interesting. Okay. So this create asset should give us a unique name for the new asset that it's creating. But more than that, I kind of want to reuse some of these processors as much as possible. I don't know if we're able to do that or not. So that is also interesting. Let's see. I'm going to take a look at create asset real quick. Down in here, we actually use the asset database to generate a unique asset path for the scriptable object we're trying to create. I thought this should give us a new unique path, so I was kind of surprised when we saw this. I'm going to try one more time on a different controller and see what we get. And then this time I'll take a better look at those error codes and see exactly what's going on and see if we could track that down. Let's do the mouse controller again this time. All right, so that seemed to work. Let's see, it was the scroll position and it set our input processor for us correctly. So that's great. The real question is if this got serialized into the actual file itself. So let's take a look at that. It did not. Look at that. So that's still empty. The other thing that I'm seeing here as well, the interaction mapping data is also still empty. So I think we actually do need to go back into this inspector, and we need to make sure we're saving or applying the serialized properties correctly, because I don't think we're doing that. All right, that's one. I think that's probably the one that we want to do. So the problem is that I think we actually have to do every single one of these, but we'll take a look here in a second. I think I actually have to find every single one of these properties and then set it like we did up here for each of these for the controller. Not going to be fun. Let's see here. I think the main ones we're interested in is state change type, input name, access type, key code, X and Y. Oh yeah, and the inner and the input action. So that one's also important. All right, so these are the ones we'll have to make sure that the values are serialized correctly. I'm just gonna copy these real quick so I have a place to reference these here. Let's go back to the inspector. Input processors is last, so I'm just going to go ahead and paste all these guys here and just get rid of the extra. All right, and then I'll just comment these out so it's a little bit easier to work with. So these are all the serialized fields we need to make sure we copy from the interaction mappings up here. Okay, so let's just copy this guy and no, it's this one. I'm gonna copy this one and paste it a few times. We got the input action. We got the state change type. We got the input name. Got the access type. We got the input type. Key code, access X and Y, so we need 3 more. Let's see. All right, there we go. All right, so now we got all of our serialized properties. Now we need to actually set them as well. So let's see. How did I do this for this, guys? This is an object. Object reference value will equal interaction mapping profile asset. I think for the most part, these are all none anyway. So I don't even know if I need to set that one. We create the default ones. I don't know if they'll actually have any input actions assigned on the first go. That'll be up to you to set in the mapping yourself as a developer. Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to worry about the input action one. The rest of these I probably will though. Let's see. Access code XY, input type, input name, state change type. Yeah, I think the rest of these will be fine. I didn't think I needed the input action one, so I think I'm just going to skip that one. Let's see. This is int value equals state change type. Oops, sorry. I want to create a shorter variable for this. Yeah, that'll work. It's just way too long to have to type all this other stuff out. So I'm just going to create a local guy here, and we'll say mapping state change type, and we're going to cast this to an int. All right. Then our input name property has a string value. Oh yeah, I missed the description as well. Let's do description, state change type, and then the input name property. see here. All right, now that all the tedious work is done, let's see if this actually works this time. Let's see, so I still think I'm going to get the error if I have multiple processors on one controller, but we'll take a look and see what happens. Let's see here. Go back and delete all this stuff again. Try again. All right. So let's take a look. Let's try the Windows Mixed Reality controller again. I know we'll get the error about multiple files, or the file being the same name already existing or something. Ah, no, that time it worked. Oh, interesting. Okay. So let's see. Take a left. Look at the left. So this one doesn't have any processors in it. I thought it would. That's why it worked. All right, so let's try the joystick one again. There we go. That was the error we were expecting. Let's see here. For the Xbox controller, it still was mad about an asset. Unity exception. Creating asset at path failed because we already had an asset there. Let's see here. Let's at least take a look and make sure that the values are getting serialized. This might be one of those times where I may not really worry about the axes being inverted, but I'm not really sure yet either. Okay, it doesn't look like it got serialized, but it could be because we hit the exception before we serialized it. So I'm going to go check out the one before it. This is also blank. All right. That makes me wonder. Let's take a look at the other ones we created over here. Let's make sure these are being set correctly. Yeah, these aren't being set correctly either. All right, so we still have a problem with serializing this data. So I'm not as worried about the processors getting in here, but the rest of this is kind of important. So I got to figure out exactly what we're doing here, where it's going wrong, and why we're not getting that those file values set correctly. Interesting. So when we're creating our data providers, we get all the serialized properties and we update them, and then we get the serialized properties for the child one, which is this mapping profiles property here. And this one seems to be getting serialized correctly and created correctly. Same with these guys. So that seems to be okay. And then this default profiles, that's the asset. We're setting this. Are we using this anywhere else though? Down here? I don't think we are. I'm not even sure why we're even setting this value. Yeah, I'm not even sure why we're doing that. I'm just going to replace this. Not sure why we needed to do that. Okay. So the next one, we are setting our properties. We get our controller mapping profiles, and then we set those. So at least the reference to the asset is getting set correctly, as far as I know. So at least that's getting set. But these are not getting set correctly. So we're creating a new serialized object. The other place that we do this is here for the mapping profile serialized object. We don't call update on it, so we probably should do that first on this guy before we do anything. And then we call them apply here at the end. Makes sense. And this is at the very end where we're oh, you know what we aren't doing? It looks like with this one, we insert an element even though it hasn't been created yet. So we may need to do that first. And then get it back out and then set it. So that's one thing we were doing differently. I'm going to distinguish this a little bit more. So in the beginning here, we create our asset. So in our beginning of our for loop, we don't do that. Oh, wait, hold on. We do. We create our asset at the beginning, way up here. Do we reference this somewhere else? Yes, here. Don't ever call on actually setting this, so maybe that might be part of the problem. let's see here. Just to get around our little issue with the naming, what I'm going to do is pretty much do what we do here to get a unique path. But what I'm going to do is add the iteration that we were in here doing. So there we go. Let's see here. Don't really care about the name here. I just want name.asset. Actually, I don't even need asset, just name. And then what we're going to do is we're going to just add k here. So that should at least keep us from getting that error with the name. But I'm still interested to know if it's serializing all of our values or not. So let's at least try and test that out. Fingers crossed. I am already tired of working on this. I want to work on the next thing. See, we're getting close to, I believe, an hour and a half on our stream. Now, these are kind of long. And I don't want to bore people, and I bet a lot of people won't really watch these because they're so long. But I'm sure there's some useful stuff in here. And I may split these up later into little useful tidbits later on. All right, so let's check out the Xbox profile. So it doesn't look like it's set any of the input processors like we wanted. Check out the generic. Well, I thought we had one of these that had the processors on them. Interesting. Yeah, at least 3 of them should have input processors. The left stick, the right stick, and the D-pad. Interesting. Let's go ahead and open these up and at least take a look, make sure our assets are getting serialized. Great, they are. That's amazing. Okay, good. So the last little bit is getting this array of input processors assigned as well. Okay. So I think part of the reason why the input processors aren't serialized is because we're actually creating new instances for them. And then we have to create the new instance as we initialize the default interactions. So I'm kind of curious as to why this didn't work correctly. So we have the name and then this here. The only thing we changed was this. We added this insert element at array, but we're doing the same thing here for interaction profiles property and then setting the asset. So I thought that would be okay. I'm going to actually split this off out into a different line. So we're creating our processor asset, and then for our property, we set the object reference value. and this is an array. So we're essentially doing the same thing here as well in our other outer for loop. So we have two for loops, one where we iterate over all of our default interaction mappings, and then we have another for loop where we iterate over all of our input processors. And essentially we're kind of following the same pattern where we take the property, we insert the element, we get the element back out for that same index, and then we set the object reference value, and then we go on to the next one, the next loop. And it seems as though Unity is setting the correct one here for the mapping profile on the outside. We could double check this. We can go to our controller data provider asset and make sure that that's getting serialized correctly. So let's take a look. I believe it is, because it wouldn't be showing up. We would have seen this error a little bit sooner. All right, so we have one single controller mapping profile, and that seems to be getting set, so that's correct. And that is just the Unity joystick controller data profile. So let's go down one level and let's check out the Xbox controller asset. Okay, so now for this one, our input actions profiles are also empty. So this is also empty. Then it looks like that this isn't being serialized properly either. So none of these values are showing up correctly. Let me just save and see if maybe that will update the file. It did. Okay, so saving did set that properly. Interesting. Okay. I wonder why the asset didn't get created. I'm going to try one more time. Delete everything. I've got another one that had, I'll do the mouse one again. And the scroll position was the one that was supposed to have it, which was weird because we were definitely getting that asset created before we added this this name to it. So we create the path. Oh, no, wrong thing. Here we go. Create asset, so we give it the path and then the file name, and then whether or not we want to ping it. I'm just going to go ahead and just remove this. Actually, I'm just going to comment it out so that I can put it back in. But for whatever reason, that seemed to have broke it, and I'm not quite sure why. I thought we were creating this asset before, so it's kind of odd that that kind of stopped working because we added the space there. Object at index 0 is null. Let's take a look at what this is getting mad at. Okay. I don't know why it's getting mad somehow that this constructor. All right. I'm not really too worried about that. It's just because we had our object selected when it reserialized, or when it tried to reload the serialized objects. Sometimes it can be kind of weird. I noticed that a lot of times Unity has problems reloading assets from disk, especially if they're serialized properties. A lot of times when I'm switching branches, I definitely notice that more often than not. Where I switch a branch and the serialized asset reference values don't get updated correctly. All right, so still no input processor like I thought we were getting before. Very interesting. I thought we had been creating this one. Let's see. I wonder what's going on with this. So now it's not creating our asset at all. We're not getting any errors either, so that's also kind of strange. So, but this object reference value is coming back null. I'm just going to go ahead and remove this apply properties here for this guy, seeing if that is actually working or not. It's the only other thing that I think could have changed. The only other thing we didn't do is inserting this element here. We can get element at k. I don't know if this actually creates one under the hood if there's not an element at that index. Yeah, I think I'm going to call the stream and kind of figure this out on my own. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you next time.